A shocking turn of events unfolded when a 16-year-old girl, residing under the same roof as her parents and younger sisters, was discovered lifeless in her room one morning after going to sleep the previous night. Although her family members had all slept peacefully, the police swiftly recognized the case as a murder mystery. However, despite their best efforts, it would take an astonishing 31 years before the case was finally solved, leaving everyone utterly unprepared for the shocking revelation that awaited them. Fawn Cox entered the world on March 24, 1973, in Kansas City, Missouri, followed shortly by the arrival of her two younger sisters. The Cox family called a modest two-story house in a tough residential neighborhood their home. Fawn's upbringing involved taking on responsibilities as a caretaker for her younger siblings from a tender age, regular attendance at church, and a fondness for swimming. At the age of 16, Fawn seized the opportunity to secure a part-time position at a local amusement park. Given their modest means, her family sought ways to supplement their income, and Fawn dedicated much of her 1,989 summer vacations to work. Her primary role involved manning the cash register and selling tickets for amusement rides, contributing to the family's financial stability. On the evening of Wednesday, July 26th, she concluded her work shift around 10 p.m. To ensure a swift journey home, her mother and younger sister came to pick her up in their car, given the extended commute from the park to her residence using public transportation. Upon arriving home, Fawn promptly retired to her bed, considering her early morning work commitment. Her bedroom was situated on the second floor, where she usually shared the space with her sisters. However, on this particular night, she found herself alone on the second floor. Her sister Amber, who was just a year younger, had taken on babysitting duties for a familiar family that evening. Meanwhile, her other sister, Felicia, opted to sleep on the first floor due to the more comfortable and cooler conditions prevailing there. The night was exceptionally hot, and the only functional air conditioner was located downstairs, where their parents also slept. The following morning, around 9 o'clock, the entire family was roused from slumber by the blaring alarm clock situated in Fawn's room. However, to their bewilderment, Fawn seemed inexplicably unwilling to silence it. Her younger sister and mother decided to investigate and ventured upstairs, only to be met with a harrowing scene. Fawn lay lifeless on her bed, her neck displaying evident signs of bruising and a pulse nowhere to be found. Without delay, her parents dialed for an ambulance, but tragically, their efforts proved futile, as it became apparent that Fawn had passed away several hours earlier. A subsequent examination by medical experts confirmed that strangulation had been the cause of her demise, revealing unsettling evidence of abuse. In those initial hours, law enforcement recognized the arduous challenge that lay ahead in their investigation. Despite Fawn's untimely demise occurring within the confines of their modest home, with its meager soundproofing, her parents and sister had been utterly oblivious to any commotion. There was, however, a plausible explanation. The aged and raucous air conditioner on the first floor had effectively drowned out any other sounds within the house. The sole peculiar detail noted that night had been Fawn's sister's observation of their anxious and barking poodle, although they had initially dismissed this behavior as a consequence of the dog's pregnancy. Upon conducting a thorough examination of the scene, law enforcement officials uncovered several crucial pieces of evidence. Their working hypothesis was that either an individual or a group of attackers had gained access to the residence through a second-story window overlooking the backyard. Adjacent to the house, there stood an aging trailer conveniently positioned to facilitate the ascent to an outbuilding's canopy, which happened to be nearly level with the aforementioned window. The window itself had been left open as a response to the absence of air conditioning on the second floor, making it necessary to combat the stifling heat. Within Fawn's room, forensic experts stumbled upon the initial significant leads: a handful of short hairs, small bloodstains, and traces of semen on her bedsheet. All of this material was subsequently dispatched to the laboratory for in-depth analysis. Furthermore, the investigation revealed several missing items from the household inventory, including radios, a Nintendo game console, and a stereo recorder. Oddly, a number of these items were found scattered on the ground outside the house, suggesting that the intruder had initially tossed them out of the window with intentions to take them, but ultimately abandoned this plan for unknown reasons. Additionally, detectives noted that various items had been removed from a closet in an adjoining room on the second floor. Their working theory was that the perpetrator had concealed themselves in this closet while awaiting an opportunity, with the intention of evading detection until everyone in the house had retired for the night. Notably, it was customary for Fawn's sister to occupy that room, but on the night in question, this was not the case, which likely contributed to the items going unnoticed. The police discovered another strange clue. An old army cap was found in Fawn's room. All her relatives said they'd never seen the girl wearing it, so detectives assumed the killer might have forgotten the cap at the scene. Despite the impressive array of evidence, police were unable to quickly identify the suspects. The problem is that in 1989, DNA forensics was rather underdeveloped, and there were no common genetic databases at that time. Detective Benjamin Caldwell, who handled the case, put forward the main version of what happened in his opinion. There could have been several assailants, and they must have known the house well. Not only did they know how to get to the second floor through the backyard in total darkness, but they must also have known the layout of the rooms. The next step for the police was to look for witnesses. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and relatives of Fawn, but all were inconclusive. The detectives had one weighty problem before them. The neighborhood in which the house was located was very poor and criminal. Various criminal gangs operated there, and their participants were quite difficult to bring to justice. A month after Fawn's murder, the case finally got off the ground. The police had a witness who pointed them to 3 suspects. This witness knew a number of important details that the police never divulged, so his story was taken seriously. The suspects were 3 teenagers, one of whom was in the same class as Fawn. They were arrested and questioned, but the boys denied any involvement in the murder. During a search of one of their homes, police found items stolen from the victim's room. This was enough to charge all 3 of them with murder. But even here, the detectives were disappointed. First, the witness suddenly recanted and stopped cooperating with the police. Second, DNA analysis of blood, hair, and semen found at the crime scene did not show an unambiguous match with the suspect's samples. In those years, experts could not yet establish an exact match of the samples, and all their tests showed questionable results. In other words, the analysis could not confirm either a full match or a guaranteed mismatch. Despite this, the police were able to obtain useful information from one of the detainees. During one of the interrogations, he confessed that he had indeed broken into Fawn's house that night in the company of other boys and stolen some things. He recounted how he made his way to the second floor through the canopy of the canopy and even revealed unknown details. According to him, when he threw a tape recorder out the window, its handle fell off. The boy hid it under a nearby bush, and the police did find the item in that very spot. Except that the young man quickly retracted his statement and no longer cooperated with the investigation, which would have prevented his confession from being used in court. Because of this, the police had to let the men go, and the investigation was at a standstill again. Most likely, the witnesses were simply intimidated, but without their testimony in court, the case had almost no chance. All we know is that one of them spent 8 months in jail for stealing items from Fawn's house. The case has since gone into a long drawer. The police didn't reopen the investigation until the early 2000s, and the first thing they did was upload DNA samples from the crime scene to the CODIS database. It had been created several years before and contained DNA samples from people tried for serious crimes. Unfortunately, no matches were found for the phone killer. The emergence of this database was the result of major scientific advances in the study of DNA. It also allowed police to recollect DNA samples from the 3 original suspects and conduct more advanced tests. This time, experts unequivocally determined that the hair, semen, and blood did not belong to any of them. This was rather odd given the fact that the suspects were found in possession of Fawn's belongings. Detectives speculated that the 3 guys had indeed robbed her house at night, but there was another man with them. He was the one who had abused and killed the girl. All of this raised even more questions. Could it be that 4 criminals entered the house unnoticed, killed Fawn, and just as unnoticed left the scene of the crime? The police still had no answer to this question. Since then, the case has once again stalled. With each passing year, the Fawn family believed less and less that the murder would ever be solved. They continued to believe that those 3 suspects had been in their house that night and could point to the killer, but would never do so. The only thing that could help them learn the truth was a DNA sample stored in the police lab. In 2018, something interesting happened. Amber, Fawn's younger sister, revealed some disturbing details about the crime that she had put into facts unknown to the police on a popular American forum for unsolved crimes. Over the 20 years of its existence, the forum had gained a very reliable reputation, and its participants have helped the police solve several high-profile cases. Amber has been verified and confirmed that she really is who she says she is, so her post is worthy of attention. She herself worked as a nanny from Monday to Friday and was only at home during the day on weekends. The girl slept in the very room on the 2nd floor through which the burglars had snuck in. Accordingly, the criminals would have been immediately spotted. In addition, they would have watched the house and waited until Fawn's mother and her younger sister went to pick up the girl from work. Despite all this, Amber's story didn't bring the case any closer to solving it. But it was already 2018, and the science of DNA research had come a long way. Dozens, if not hundreds, of long-forgotten cases were being solved thanks to new analysis tools. Fawn's relatives saw it all and resented why the police were in no hurry to reopen the murder investigation. They kept talking to detectives about the case, and each time they got the same answer: extended DNA testing requires money, and the police have dozens of cases waiting for funding. But the relatives decided to take the initiative and launched a fundraiser. In 2019, the family wanted to cover the full cost of the DNA samples and also offered a $10,000 reward for any information that would lead to the perpetrator's capture. Due to the extensive media coverage of the case and numerous interviews given by the family, many people who cared responded to requests for help. The family quickly collected the necessary amount of money, but even here they were disappointed. The police department refused to initiate this investigation at the expense of the relatives of the victim. The lead detective explained that there was bound to be a big problem in such a situation. If the relatives of one victim could pay for such tests and expedite the results, then hundreds of other families who have been searching for years for the murder of their loved ones should have the same right. But it is simply impossible to implement such a thing in practice, since only a few laboratories in the world conduct innovative DNA tests, and with such a simultaneous influx of those wishing to do so, their resources are simply not enough. The leading company in this field is Parabon Nanolabs, which we have already repeatedly mentioned in other stories. They have made tremendous progress in the study of DNA, from finding a person's relatives from the smallest genetic samples to creating an approximate portrait of the owner of the DNA. It was this lab that was to take over the study of the samples left in Fawn's bedroom the night she was murdered. The girl's relatives believed that the police were in no hurry to pursue their case for another reason. They were a poor family from a bad neighborhood, and murder was not a priority for investigators there. In an interview, Fawn's sister said that if it had been a murder of a family of rich or high-ranking people, all the necessary investigations would have been done instantly. Unfortunately, they never managed to expedite the process, and it wasn't until late 2020 that the long-awaited breakthrough happened, but the family wasn't ready for that kind of truth. With funding from the FBI, the police did send samples from Fawn's room to a lab there. They began a detailed examination of the DNA and a search for possible relatives of its possessor. It was the semen sample found at the murder scene that they mostly worked with. In November 2020, they were finally able to find the person to whom that DNA belonged. It turned out to be Fawn's cousin, Fawn Cox. Of course, such news shocked the whole family. At the time of Fawn's death, Donald was 21 years old, and no one had even considered his possible involvement. That said, Donald was a pretty troubled man and was constantly behind bars. He was tried for misdemeanors, such as theft and possession of illegal substances. Unfortunately, in those years, they did not yet take a DNA sample from such criminals. Otherwise, this case would have been solved much earlier. Donald died of an overdose in 2006, but the police investigated his death because certain circumstances seemed suspicious to them. It was because of that investigation that a sample of his DNA was preserved, but it was not entered into the FBI database because the man in that case was a victim, not a perpetrator. Once the experts informed the police of their discovery, they matched the sample with the semen found at the murder scene and got a 100% match. Despite the gravity of this discovery, the relatives have received an answer to a question that has plagued them for 31 years. But there remained one very important point in the whole story. A great deal of evidence indicated that the three original suspects had also been in the phone house that night. It was now becoming clear how the perpetrators knew the house and the family's routines so precisely. Donald was a frequent visitor and knew all these nuances. However, the police closed the case and no new charges were filed against the three men. Fawn's sister said she saw no point in trying to get a confession out of them. Even though the men had been present in the house at night, they may not have even witnessed the murder itself. Donald may well have stayed in the house alone and only then attacked Fawn. Felicia added that the three suspects had already paid for their act throughout this time. While the case remained unsolved, the entire neighborhood was 100% certain of their guilt. Because of this, they were treated very negatively, with all the consequences that would follow. According to Sister Fawn, their lives were effectively ruined. In addition, after the case was closed, it turned out that the police had originally learned about the suspects from the family of one of them. Relatives noticed a Nintendo set-top box among his belongings and remembered that this was the one that had been stolen from Fawn's house. It was on the news, and everyone in the neighborhood already knew the details. In any case, it is simply impossible to prove their guilt, and the relatives of the victim finally know the name of the killer. He lived for 17 years without any punishment for what he had done. In all that time, as if nothing had happened, he communicated with his family. But eventually, his addiction to illegal substances drove him to his grave, and he was no longer a threat to anyone. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like the video if you like it. Thanks for watching.